Jake Mitchell wiped the sweat from his forehead as he moved carefully through the broken buildings. The war had been going on for 3 months now, and this planet looked like a nightmare. Broken crystal towers reached toward the purple sky like broken fingers. The air smelled like burnt metal and something sweet that made his nose wrinkle. His team followed behind him quietly. Lisa Hayes carried her rifle ready, and her eyes moved from side to side, watching for enemies. Danny Rodriguez checked his scanner every few seconds, looking for movement. Amy Foster stayed close to the group and kept her medical kit ready. They had been walking for 2 hours and found nothing but empty buildings and strange alien writing. On the walls, the Zephyrians lived in these crystal cities before the humans came. Jake did not understand why the war started, but he knew his job was to follow orders. Find the enemy positions and report back to base. Do not engage unless attacked. Keep the team safe. Simple rules that had kept him alive for 10 years in the military. A sound made him stop walking. It was very quiet, but it sounded like crying. Lisa looked at him with questions in her eyes. Jake held up his hand, and the team stopped moving. The sound came again from somewhere ahead of them. It was definitely crying, and it sounded young. Danny checked his scanner again and shook his head. No movement showing on the screen. Amy moved closer to Jake and whispered that she heard it too. The crying was coming from a pile of broken crystal, pieces that used to be a building. Jake knew the smart thing was to keep moving. Enemy civilians were not their problem. But the crying sounded so sad and afraid. Jake made a decision that would change everything. He pointed to the crystal pile and started walking toward it. Lisa grabbed his arm and shook her head, but Jake gently moved her hand away. The crying got louder as they got closer. It was definitely a child crying for help. The crystal pieces were heavy, but Jake started moving them carefully. Lisa and Danny helped while Amy watched for enemies. The crying got clearer, and Jake could hear small words in a language he did not understand. After moving 6 large pieces, they found a small opening. Jake got down on his knees and looked inside. A small face looked back at him. The child had blue skin that glowed softly and large purple eyes filled with tears. Strange markings covered her face like tiny stars that sparkled in the dark. She was trapped under more crystal pieces, and her left arm looked hurt. When she saw Jake, she tried to move away, but there was nowhere to go. Jake spoke softly even though he knew. She could not understand English. He told her everything would be okay, and that he wanted to help. His voice was calm and gentle, like when he talked to his sister's children back on Earth. The alien child stopped crying and watched his face carefully. It took 30 minutes to move enough crystal pieces to reach the child. She was small like a 7-year-old human, but her body was different. Her skin had a soft glow, and her hair looked like silver threads. The markings on her face were more complex than Jake first thought. They looked like a crown made of tiny stars. Amy crawled into the small space with her medical kit. She moved slowly and spoke softly while checking the child's injuries. The alien girl watched Amy's hands, but did not try to pull away. Her left arm was broken, and she had cuts on her legs, but nothing too serious. Amy wrapped the arm carefully and cleaned the cuts with gentle movements. The child started making soft sounds that might have been words. Jake thought she was trying to say thank you, but he could not be sure. When Amy finished with the medical care, Jake reached out his hand slowly. The child looked at his hand for a long time, then reached out with her good arm and touched his fingers. Skin felt warm and smooth, like touching a smooth stone that had been sitting in sunlight. The glowing got a little brighter when she touched him, and Jake felt something strange in his chest. This was not an enemy. This was just a scared child who needed help. Jake picked up the alien girl carefully, and she did not fight him. She was lighter than a human child and her body felt fragile, like she might break if he squeezed too hard. She looked up at his face with those big purple eyes and made more soft sounds. Jake thought she was trying to tell him something important. Lisa checked the area one more time, while Danny packed up the scanner. Amy gathered her medical supplies and looked worried. They all knew that taking an enemy civilian back to base was against orders. They could all get in serious trouble. But looking at the small frightened child in Jake's arms made the choice easy. The walk back to base took longer, because Jake moved carefully to avoid hurting the child. She fell asleep in his arms halfway back, and her soft glowing made her look peaceful. Sometimes she would make small sounds in her sleep, and her good hand would grab onto Jake's uniform shirt. When they reached the base perimeter, the guards stared in shock. Nobody expected to see a human soldier carrying an alien child like she was his own daughter. The word spread quickly through the base, and soldiers came out to look. Some looked angry, and some looked curious, but most just looked surprised. Jake ignored all the stares and walked straight to the medical tent. The child was still sleeping, and he did not want to wake her up. His commander would want to see him soon, and Jake knew he would have to explain his decision. But right now the only thing that mattered was making sure the child was safe and cared for. As he walked through the base, Jake realized that everything had changed. This small alien child, sleeping in his arms, had already started something that would grow bigger than anyone could imagine. He just did not know it yet. Dr. Kate Sullivan looked up from her medical charts when Jake carried the alien child into the tent. She had been a field medic for 8 years and had seen many strange things, but never anything like this. The child's soft blue glow lit up the dim tent, and her silver hair caught the light from the medical lamps. The child woke up when Jake placed her gently on the examination table. Her big purple eyes opened wide as she looked around the tent with fear. She saw the medical equipment and tried to crawl away, but Jake put his hand on her shoulder and spoke softly. His calm voice seemed to help because she stopped trying to. Run. Kate moved slowly and kept her hands where the child could see them. She pointed to herself and said Kate several times until the child seemed to understand that was her name. The alien girl pointed to herself and made a sound that was impossible for human mouths to make. It sounded like wind chimes mixed with singing. Lieutenant Ben Carter arrived 20 minutes later with his translation equipment. He was the best linguist in the unit and spoke 7 Earth languages, plus some basic alien dialects from other species. Humanity had met. He set up his computers and started recording the sounds the child made. The child watched Ben's equipment with curiosity instead of fear. When he played back her sounds, she clapped her hands and her glow got brighter. She seemed to understand that he was trying to learn her language. She started pointing to things and saying their names in her musical voice. Jake stayed close to the examination table the whole time. Every time the child got scared or nervous, she would reach for his hand. When she touched him, her glow would get calmer and she would relax. Kate noticed that the child trusted Jake completely, even though they had just met. Ben worked with the child for 2 hours and learned that she called herself something that sounded like Star Singing Water. He shortened it to Star because humans could not make the musical sounds of her real name. Star seemed to like the human name and repeated it several times with a sound that might have been laughter. Captain Alex Turner came to the medical tent just as Kate finished rechecking Star's injuries. Alex worked in intelligence, and his job was to know everything about enemy forces and civilians. He looked at Star for a long time, and his face got very serious. He asked Ben to ask Star some specific questions. Ben spoke to Star using the words he had learned and some hand signals. Star answered quickly and pointed to the markings on her face. Alex looked at the markings closely and pulled out a tablet computer. He showed Ben some pictures, and they talked quietly while Star watched them with curious eyes. Alex's voice was excited when he turned to Jake. The markings on Star's face were not just decoration. They were royal crown markings that only the immediate family of the Zephyrian queen could have. Star was not just any refugee child. She was the missing daughter of Queen Lirelei, who ruled the entire Zephyrian Empire. Jake felt his stomach drop. 3 months ago, every intelligence report said that Queen Lirelei's daughter had disappeared during the first attacks of the war. The queen's grief and anger over her lost child had made the war much worse. The Zephyrians fought harder because their queen demanded revenge for her daughter's disappearance. Star did not understand the big words that Alex and Ben were using, but she could tell that the adults were upset about something. She reached for Jake's hand again and made questioning sounds. Jake squeezed her small hand gently and tried to smile, even though his mind was racing with worry. Ben asked Star about her mother using simple words and pictures on his tablet. Star's whole face lit up, and she started talking very fast in her musical language. She pointed to a picture that looked like a tall woman with elaborate crown markings and made happy sounds. She kept saying one word over and over that Ben thought meant Mother or Mama. Kate finished her medical report while the others talked. Star's broken arm was healing well with the human medical supplies. The cuts on her legs were almost gone, and she was eating the human food without problems. Physically, she was getting better every day. The bigger problem was what to do with her. Alex said that Command would want to use Star as a bargaining chip to end the war. They could trade her back to her mother in exchange for peace or favorable terms. Jake did not like the sound of that plan because it meant treating Star like an object instead of a person. Star stayed close to Jake for the rest of the day. When he had to leave for briefings, she would get upset and her glow would dim. When he came back, she would make happy sounds and reach for him immediately. The other soldiers started calling Jake her human daddy as a joke, but Jake did not think it was funny. That night, Jake sat with Star in the medical tent while she slept. Kate had set up a small bed for her and given her some soft blankets. Star slept curled up like a human child, but her soft glow never completely went away. Sometimes she would make small sounds in her sleep, and Jake wondered if she was dreaming about her real mother. Ben came back after dinner with better translation software. He had been working all evening to understand more of Star's language. She was very smart and learned human words quickly. By bedtime, she could say Jake and Kate and help and thank you in broken English that sounded like music. The next morning, Star woke up before everyone else and climbed out of her bed quietly. She found Jake sleeping in a chair next to her bed and crawled into his lap. When Jake woke up, Star was curled against his chest with her head on his shoulder. She looked up at him and said something in her language that Ben later translated. As Papa Jake. Jake felt something warm spread through his chest when he heard those words. This small alien child had adopted him as her protector and father figure in just 2 days. She trusted him completely and looked to him for safety and comfort. Jake realized that he would do anything to keep her safe and happy. Word spread through the base that the alien child had royal blood. Some soldiers thought they should send her back immediately to end the war. Others thought they should keep her as insurance. But everyone noticed how she stayed close to Jake and how gentle he was with her. Commander Patricia Wells arrived that afternoon to see Star for herself. Star hid behind Jake when the commander approached, but she was brave enough to peek out and look at the tall human woman. Wells asked Ben to translate while she spoke to Star directly instead of talking about her like she was not there. Star answered the commander's questions politely, but kept holding on to Jake's hand. When Wells asked if Star wanted to go home, Star nodded quickly and said Mama several times. But when Wells asked if she would go with other humans, Star shook her head and pointed to Jake. She would only go home if Papa Jake came with her. Wells looked at Jake for a long time without speaking. Finally, she asked if he understood what he was getting into. Jake said he understood, that Star was just a scared child who needed someone to take care of her. Everything else was politics, and Jake was not good at politics. He was good at protecting people who needed protection. That evening, Star tried to teach Jake some words in her language, while Ben helped translate. She was patient when Jake could not make the musical sounds correctly, and clapped when he got close to the right pronunciation. Jake taught her more English words, and was amazed at how fast she learned. Star fell asleep in Jake's arms again that night, while he told her simple stories about Earth. She did not understand all the words, but she liked the sound of his voice. As Jake looked down at the small glowing child sleeping peacefully, he knew that his life had changed forever. Star had become family, and nothing would make him abandon her now. The command ship USS Liberty hung in space above the planet like a steel mountain. Jake had never been on such a big ship before, and the endless corridors made him feel lost. Star held his hand tightly as they walked through the ship and her eyes were wide with wonder at all the new sights. Commander Patricia Wells had decided that Star was too important to stay on the planet base. The command staff needed to decide what to do with the alien princess, and that meant bringing her to the main ship. Jake came along because Star refused to go anywhere without her Papa Jake. Admiral George Harrison waited for them in the main briefing room. He was an old man with gray hair and serious eyes who had been fighting wars for longer than Jake had been alive. Star hid behind Jake when she saw the Admiral, but she was brave enough to say hello in English when the big man spoke to her gently. The briefing room had a large table surrounded by chairs and screens showing maps of the war zone. Intelligence officers sat around the table with tablets and data files about Zephyrian forces. Jake felt out of place among all the high-ranking officers, but Star seemed fascinated by all the glowing screens and blinking lights. Ben Carter had been working day and night to improve his translation of Star's language. His computers could now understand about 60% of what Star said, and she was learning new English words every hour. The breakthrough came when Star started drawing pictures to help explain things that words could not describe. Star drew pictures of her home and her mother and the crystal cities where she lived. Her drawings were surprisingly good for a child, and they showed details that made Ben realize how advanced Zephyrian culture really was. But the most important drawings came when Ben asked Star about how the war started. Star's face got sad when Ben asked about the bad things that happened before Jake found her. She drew pictures of her home being attacked, but the attackers in her drawings did not look like humans. They were tall and thin with dark skin and no faces. Their ships were black and shaped like daggers instead of the round human ships. Ben showed Star pictures of human soldiers and ships on his tablet. Star shook her head quickly and pointed to her drawing of the faceless attackers. She said no many times and drew clear differences between the real attackers and the humans. The attackers used weapons that turned people into dust and ships that could disappear like ghosts. Admiral Harrison leaned forward when Ben translated Star's words. The creatures Star described sounded like the Void-born raiders that intelligence had been tracking for years. The Void-born were pirates and slavers who attacked colonies and stole everything valuable. They were known for using stolen technology from other species. Star drew more pictures showing the Void-born using human weapons and human ship parts. Ben asked her carefully if she was sure, and Star nodded seriously. She had seen the attackers up close when they destroyed her home. Some of their weapons had human writing on them, and their ships had pieces that looked like human ship parts. The room got very quiet when everyone realized what Star's drawings meant. The Zephyrians had been attacked by Voidborn raiders using stolen human technology. Queen Lirelei thought humans had attacked her people and killed her daughter. The whole war was based on a terrible misunderstanding. Captain Alex Turner pulled up files on his computer about Voidborn raids in the past year. 3 human colonies had been attacked and their technology stolen. 2 Earth cargo ships had disappeared near Zephyr in space. The timeline matched perfectly with when the war started. Star kept drawing pictures to help explain what she had seen. She drew herself hiding in a crystal cave while the attackers destroyed her city. She saw them loading stolen crystal technology onto their black ships. She watched them leave human weapon parts behind to make it look like humans had done the attack. Admiral Harrison asked Ben to ask Star about her mother's reaction to the attack. Star's drawings showed Queen Lirelei crying over the destroyed city and the missing daughter. The queen was so angry and sad that she ordered her fleets to attack any human ships they found. She wanted revenge for what she thought humans had done. Jake felt sick as he realized how much death and suffering had come from this lie. Thousands of human and Zephyrian soldiers had died fighting each other while the real enemy escaped with their stolen technology. Star's rescue was the first step toward revealing the truth, but the damage was already done. Star noticed that all the adults looked upset, and she climbed into Jake's lap for comfort. She whispered questions in her musical language, and Jake tried to explain that they were sad about the bad things that happened to her people. Star nodded seriously and patted Jake's face like she was trying to make him feel better. Dr. Sullivan came to the briefing room to check on Star's health and bring her lunch. Star had been eating human food without problems and seemed to be getting stronger every day. Her broken arm was almost completely healed, and she could move it normally. The cuts on her legs had disappeared completely. While Star ate her lunch, she continued drawing pictures and talking to Ben about her memories. She drew her mother's palace and the crystal gardens where she used to play. She drew pictures of Zephyrian children who looked different from humans but played similar games. Her drawings showed a peaceful civilization that valued art and music and beauty. The most important drawing came when Star tried to show how much her mother loved her. She drew Queen Lirelei singing to her at bedtime and teaching her to dance and reading her stories about brave Zephyrian heroes. The queen was not just a ruler, but a mother who missed her daughter desperately. Admiral Harrison made a decision that surprised everyone in the room. Instead of using Star as a bargaining chip, he decided to return her to her mother as a gesture of good faith. The humans would tell Queen Lirelei the truth about the Voidborn attacks and offer to work together to catch the real enemy. Some of the intelligence officers thought this plan was too risky. Queen Lirelei might not believe the human story and could use the meeting as a trap. But Admiral Harrison said that continuing the war while the real enemy escaped was even more risky. Someone had to take the first step toward peace. Jake was chosen to accompany Star home because she trusted him completely and refused to go with anyone else. Dr. Sullivan would come along to provide medical support, and Ben would handle translation. It would be a small diplomatic mission with a very big goal. Star did not understand all the adult conversations, but she could tell that something important was happening. When Ben explained that they were going to take her home to see her mama, Star's glow got so bright that everyone in the room had to squint. She hugged Jake tightly and said Mama and Papa Jake over and over. The mission would be dangerous because they were going into enemy space with just a small ship and a tiny crew. If Queen Lirelei did not believe their story, the humans might never come back. But looking at Star's happy face as she drew pictures of her reunion with her mother made the risk seem worthwhile. That night, Star fell asleep drawing pictures of Jake meeting her mother. In her drawings, Queen Lirelei was shaking hands with Papa Jake while Star stood between them smiling. It was the dream of a child who wanted her two families to be friends. Jake looked at Star's innocent drawings and hoped that reality would be as simple and beautiful as a child's imagination. But even if the mission failed, Jake knew he was doing the right thing. Star deserved to go home to her mother, and the truth deserved to be told. Everything else was in the hands of fate and the wisdom of two species learning to trust each other. The small diplomatic ship Peaceful Dawn moved slowly through space toward the neutral meeting point. Jake sat in the passenger area, watching Star look out the window at the stars. Her face was pressed against the clear material, and her eyes were wide with excitement. She pointed at different colored stars and asked Ben what they were called in English. Dr. Sullivan checked her medical supplies for the 10th time since they left the USS Liberty. She was nervous about meeting an alien queen, but tried not to show it. Star noticed Kate's worry and brought her a drawing she had made of all four of them standing together smiling. Kate smiled for real when she saw the picture, and Star clapped her hands happily. Ben worked on his translation computers during the trip. He had learned much more of Star's language and could now understand about 80% of what she said. Star helped him by teaching him new words and correcting his pronunciation when he got the musical sounds wrong. She was a patient teacher and seemed to enjoy helping her human friends learn. Star had been excited about going home ever since they told her about the plan. She made many drawings of her mother and talked constantly about showing Queen Lirelei all the things she had learned from the humans. She wanted to teach her mother English words and show her how to shake hands like humans do. The journey took 3 days, and Star entertained everyone with stories about her home world. Ben translated as Star described crystal forests that sang in the wind and lakes that glowed different colors. She told them about Zephyrian festivals, where everyone danced under the light of 3 moons, and concerts where thousands of voices created music that could be felt in the heart. Jake learned that Star was much older than she looked by human standards. Zephyrians age differently, and Star was actually the equivalent of a human teenager, even though she seemed like a young child. She was smart and curious, and asked endless questions about Earth and human culture. Jake told her about snow and oceans and animals that Star had never imagined. On the second day, Star started getting more excited and nervous about seeing her mother again. She asked Ben to help her practice what she would say when they met. She wanted to tell Queen Lirelei about Papa Jake and how kind the humans had been to her. She practiced saying thank you in both languages until she got it perfect. The neutral space station Harmony Point appeared ahead of them on the 3rd day. It was a huge structure built by the Galactic Trade Council for meetings between different species. Ships from many worlds docked there, and beings of all shapes and sizes lived and worked in the massive station. Star had never seen so many different types of people in one place. Captain Roy Mitchell piloted their ship to the docking bay assigned for the meeting. He was not related to Jake, but they shared the same last name and had become friends during the trip. Roy was nervous about docking at a station with Zephyrian warships nearby, but he tried to stay calm for Star's sake. Queen Lirelei's fleet had arrived first and was waiting in formation around the station. The Zephyrian ships were beautiful works of art that looked like they were grown instead of built. They were made of the same crystal material as Zephyrian buildings, and they glowed with soft-colored lights. Star pressed her face to the window and pointed excitedly at her. People's ships. The docking process took an hour because both sides were being very careful about security. Zephyrian guards came aboard first to check the small human ship for weapons or threats. Star talked to them in her musical language, and they were shocked to see their missing princess alive and healthy. Jake watched the Zephyrian guards carefully and was surprised by how beautiful they were. They had the same blue glowing skin as Star, but they were taller and more elegant. Their armor was made of living crystal that moved and shifted like liquid while still protecting them. They carried weapons that hummed with energy, but they kept them lowered and non-threatening. When the security check was finished, both groups moved to the neutral meeting room in the center of the station. The room was designed to be comfortable for many different species with adjustable lighting and atmosphere controls. Jake felt his heart beating fast as they walked through the corridors, knowing that the next few hours would determine if there would be peace or more war. Queen Lirelei was already waiting in the meeting room when they arrived. Jake had seen pictures of her in intelligence files, but seeing her in person was completely different. She was tall and graceful, like a living statue made of starlight. Her crown markings were elaborate works of art that covered most of her face, and her eyes held the wisdom and sadness of a ruler who had lost everything. The queen stood perfectly still when the doors opened, and Star walked into the room. 4. A moment that felt like forever. Mother and daughter just looked at each other across the space. Star's glow got brighter and brighter until she was shining like a small sun. Then she ran across the room, shouting the Zephyrian word for mother, Queen. Lirelei caught her daughter in her arms, and both of them started making sounds that were part crying and part singing. The queen's crystal crown markings flowed with tears that looked like liquid diamonds. She held Star tightly and spoke to her in rapid musical sentences that Ben could barely follow. Star talked just as fast, telling her mother about everything that had happened. Jake stood back and watched the reunion, feeling emotions he had not expected. Seeing Star happy with her real mother made him both joyful and sad at the same time. He was glad that she was home, but he would miss her more than he wanted to admit. She had become like a daughter to him in the short time they had been together. Star pulled away from her mother and ran back to Jake. She grabbed his hand and pulled him toward Queen Lirelei while talking excitedly in her language. Ben translated as Star introduced Papa Jake to her mother and explained how he had saved her from the crystal ruins and taken care of her like family. Queen Lirelei looked at Jake for a long time without speaking. Her eyes were ancient and wise, and Jake felt like she could see into his soul. Finally, she spoke in accented but clear English, thanking him for protecting our most precious treasure. Her voice was beautiful and sad, like music played in an empty cathedral. Jake tried to explain about the Voidborn and the misunderstanding that had started the war, but Queen Lirelei held up her hand to stop him. She said that Star had already told her everything through their mental connection that Zephyrian royalty shared. The queen had learned the truth about the attacks and knew that humans were not the real enemy. The formal negotiations lasted several more hours, but the real breakthrough had already happened. Star sat between her mother and Jake, holding both their hands while the adults discussed ceasefires and joint operations against the Voidborn. Every time the conversation got tense, Star would squeeze their hands and remind them that they were supposed to be friends now. Queen Lirelei asked Jake what reward he wanted for returning her daughter. Jake said he did not want any reward because protecting children was what decent people did automatically. The queen smiled for the first time since they had met and said that Jake's response proved that humans were a species worth befriending. Star made her mother promise that Jake could visit them on the Zephyrian homeworld. She wanted to show him the crystal forests and the singing lakes she had told him about. Queen Lirelei agreed and formally invited Jake to be an honored guest whenever he wanted to come. Star clapped her hands and hugged both of them at the same time. As the meeting ended, Star gave Jake a small crystal pendant that had been made from pieces of her home city. She said it would always remind him that he was part of her family now, and that she would never forget Papa Jake. Jake felt his eyes getting wet as he put the pendant around his neck. The goodbye was hard, but Star was excited about going home and showing her mother all the human words she had learned. She promised to practice her English and to draw pictures of her home to send to Jake. Queen Lirelei promised that the Zephyrians would always remember Jake's kindness and that there would be peace between their peoples. Jake watched through the station windows as the Zephyrian fleet prepared to leave. He could see Star waving at him from the bridge of her mother's flagship. The crystal ships began to glow brighter as they powered up their engines, and one by one they disappeared into faster-than-light travel, leaving only sparkles of light behind. The trip back to human space was quiet, and Jake spent most of it looking at Star's drawings and remembering her musical laughter. Dr. Sullivan said that Jake had done something that would be remembered for thousands of years. Ben said that Jake had prevented a war that could have destroyed both civilizations. Jake just hoped that Star would be happy with her mother and that she would remember the humans who had taken care of her. 1 year later, Jake stood in the crystal gardens of the Zephyrian royal palace, watching Star dance with a group of young Zephyrians. She had grown taller, and her crown markings had become more elaborate, but she still ran to hug Papa Jake whenever she saw him. Her English was now perfect, and she could switch between languages without thinking about it. The war had ended 6 months after Star's return home. Queen Lirelei had shared Star's testimony about the Voidborn attacks with the Galactic Council, and joint human Zephyrian fleets had tracked down the raiders. The real enemy had been destroyed in a series of battles that showed how powerful the two species could be. When they worked together, Jake had been promoted to colonel and given command of the new joint human Zephyrian base on Harmony Point. Was not a job he had asked for, but Admiral Harrison said that Jake understood both species better than anyone else. The base was a symbol of cooperation and friendship between former enemies. Dr. Sullivan had become the chief medical officer for interspecies relations and spent her time developing treatments that worked for both humans and Zephyrians. She had learned that the two species were more similar than anyone had realized, and that many human medicines could be adapted for Zephyrian biology. Her work had saved thousands of lives on both sides. Ben Carter had written the first comprehensive translation guide for the Zephyrian language and was now teaching alien linguistics at the Earth Space Academy. His work with Star had become the foundation for all future communication between humans and Zephyrians. Students from both species came to learn from the man who had helped end a war with words. Star had become something amazing that nobody had expected. She was not just a bridge between two species, but a symbol of what was possible when people chose understanding over fear. She gave speeches at schools and conferences about the importance of friendship and kindness. Her message was simple but powerful. People were people no matter what they looked like or where they came from. The crystal gardens where Star danced were a gift from Queen Lirelei to the galaxy. They had been built on Harmony Point as a place where beings from all species could come to find peace and beauty. The gardens sang with wind chimes that played music from 100 different worlds, and the crystal trees grew in patterns that told the story of how enemies became friends. Jake walked through the gardens, thinking about how much his life had changed. He had started as a simple soldier following orders, and now he was helping to build a future where humans and aliens could live and work together. Sometimes he still could not believe that finding one scared child had led to all of this. Star finished her dance and ran to Jake with her face glowing bright with happiness. She told him in rapid English about her day learning human history and Zephyrian science from teachers on both worlds. She was becoming an expert in both cultures and could explain the differences and similarities better than most adults. Queen Lirelei joined them in the gardens as the 3 moons of Harmony Point rose in the evening sky. She had changed too since Star's return, and seemed younger and happier than the sad ruler Jake had first met. The Queen spent part of each year on Harmony Point, working with human leaders to build stronger ties between their civilizations. The 3 of them sat together on a crystal bench watching the stars come out in the alien sky. Star leaned against. Jake on one side and her mother on the other, while she talked about her plans for the future. She wanted to become an ambassador like Jake and help other species learn to be friends instead of enemies. Jake thought about all the soldiers who had died in the war before the truth came out. Human and Zephyrian families had lost sons and daughters because of lies and misunderstanding. The peace had come too late for them, but it was not too late for the children, who would grow up in a galaxy where different species could trust each other. The Mitchell-Lireley Accords had been signed 3 months ago, in a ceremony that brought together leaders from dozens of worlds. The agreement created the first permanent alliance between humans and an alien species and established principles for peaceful contact with other civilizations. Jake and Queen Lireley had signed the document together while Star translated for beings who spoke neither English nor Zephyrian. Star had insisted that the peace agreement include protections for children of all species. She remembered being scared and alone and wanted to make sure that no child would ever be hurt because adults could not solve their problems with words instead of weapons. The Children's Protection Treaty was now part of galactic law and applied to all member species. Trade between Earth and the Zephyrian worlds had made both civilizations richer and stronger. Human technology worked well with Zephyrian crystal science, and together they had created inventions that neither species could have made alone. The joint research stations were producing medical advances in space, travel improvements that benefited everyone. Jake had visited Earth several times during the year to speak at schools and military academies about the importance of treating all beings with respect and dignity. He always brought recordings of Star singing traditional Zephyrian songs and pictures of the crystal cities that showed how beautiful alien civilizations could be. The children who heard his talks grew up knowing that aliens were not monsters, but neighbors. The best part of Jake's new life was the time he spent with Star and Queen Lireley. They had become his adopted family, and he had become part of theirs. Star called him Papa Jake in front of everyone, and Queen Lireley treated him like a brother. When people asked Jake about his greatest achievement, he always said it was gaining a daughter among the stars. Star had taught Jake to speak basic Zephyrian, and he could now have simple conversations with her friends and teachers. The musical language was difficult for human voices, but Star was patient with his pronunciation and clapped whenever he got a sentence right. She said his accent was funny, but cute like a baby Zephyrian, learning to talk. As they sat in the gardens, Star pulled out a new drawing she had made. It showed hundreds of different alien species, all holding hands around a giant tree that reached up to touch the stars. At the base of the tree were small figures that looked like Jake and Star and Queen Lireley planting seeds together. Star said it was her dream of what the galaxy could become. Jake looked at the drawing and thought about how much bigger Star's dreams were than anything he had ever imagined. She saw a future where all the children of all the worlds could play together. In peace, it seemed impossible, but then again, finding one alien child in the ruins had seemed impossible. 2. Queen Lireley announced that next month there would be a special ceremony to celebrate the first anniversary of the peace treaty. Representatives from 50 different species would come to Harmony Point to renew their commitment to cooperation and friendship. Star would give the opening speech because she represented the hope that all children could grow up in a better galaxy. The ceremony would also mark the opening of the new Academy for Interspecies Understanding, where young beings from all over the galaxy could come to learn about other cultures and languages. Star would be one of the first students and eventually one of the teachers. The academy was built in the Crystal Gardens so that students would always remember that peace was as beautiful and precious as the singing trees. That night, Jake stood on the balcony of his quarters, looking up at the alien constellations and thinking about the journey that had brought him here. A year ago, he had been a soldier in a war he did not understand. Now he was helping to build a future where wars like that might never happen again. Dot Star appeared beside him on the balcony, carrying a small crystal that glowed with warm light. She said it was a night light for Papa Jake, so he would never be alone in the dark. Jake hugged her tightly and told her that she was the brightest light in his life and that he was proud to be her adopted father. Dot, as they stood together looking at the stars, Star began to sing a Zephyrian lullaby that her mother had taught her. Her voice carried across the gardens, and other voices joined in from all over the station. Humans and Zephyrians and beings from a dozen other worlds all sang together in harmony under the infinite sky. Jake listened to the music and thought about how one act of kindness had grown into something that would change the galaxy forever. He had saved one child, and in return, that child had saved two civilizations from destroying each other. Star was right when she said that families were made by love instead of blood. The whole galaxy could become one big family if enough people had the courage to reach across the darkness and take each other's hands. The song ended, but the peace it represented would last for generations. Jake knew that he had been part of something greater than himself, and that Star would carry the message of hope and friendship to every corner of the galaxy. The little alien princess who had once been trapped under crystal ruins had become the light that would guide countless species toward a better future together among the stars.